Good afternoon or morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at the 2022 Bowder Lecture. The Bowder Lecture by Howard Community College is made possible by a generous grant from Dr. Lillian Bowder, a Columbia resident and community leader, and I must say a gracious individual who is here and joined us today. She's in the back row. If she can raise her hand. We are also grateful that she has made today possible and ensures that our students, our faculty, our staff, and our community are exposed to wonderful authors. Howard Community College presents an annual endowed lecture known as the Bowder Lecture, and the chosen book will be celebrated with 2 student awards. Known as the Dawn Bowder Awards, any Howard Community College student who has read the featured book is eligible to respond and reflect on that book in an essay or other creative format. The awards honor the memory of Don Bowder, late husband of Dr. Bowder, and a champion of civil rights and social justice causes. The Bowder Lecture is a collaborative effort. Thank you to the Book Connection Committee, a partnership between the college and Hoco Palazzo, and to the Howard County Public Library for being a co-promoter. At HCC, I must also thank the Offices of Student Life, the Office of Development, Public Relations and Marketing, as well as the HCC Library and the English and Humanities faculty. It really takes everybody to make this possible today. There are 3 parts for the Bowder Lecture: a keynote by Mr. Gabriel Bump, he will be joining us shortly, followed by a dialogue with author Tyrese Coleman, and it will end with a question and answer period. So you are welcome at the end of the lecture in the Q&A to bring your own questions forward. So now, without any further ado, I am pleased to introduce Tyrese Coleman. Tyrese is a writer, a wife, a mother, and an attorney. Her debut collection of stories and essays, How to Sit, a memoir in stories and essays, was published by Mason Jar Press in 2018 and nominated for the 2019 PEN Open Book Award. Her work has appeared as a notable in Best American Essays 2018 and 2016 and nominated for the Pushcart Prize. Please welcome Ms. Coleman.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I feel honored to have been invited to participate in this lecture series, and I look forward to the talk that we have and your questions and hearing what you all think about this beautifully written Everywhere You Don't Belong. I fell in love with the book, and I hope you all did too. And so without further ado, let me introduce our featured speaker. Gabrielle Bump is the author of Everywhere You Don't Belong, New York Times Book Review Notable Book of 2020, and an Electric Lit Favorite Novel of 2020. The novel follows protagonist Claude, a young Black man born on the south side of Chicago and raised by his civil rights era grandmother, who tries to shape him into a principled actor for change. Yet when the riots consume his neighborhood, he hesitates to take sides, unwilling to let race define his life. He escapes Chicago to go to college, to find a new identity, and to leave the pressure cooker of his hometown behind. But as he discovers, there is no safe haven for a young Black man in this time and place called America. Of the book, the Paris Review said, a classic Bildungsroman made better by a lot of love for warts and all Chicago. And I see dashes of Percival Everett in Bump's deadpan, how his characters cross the stage with the sachet and sometimes more. And we were just talking about how this book is essentially at its core a love story, and I love that about it. Bump's nonfiction and fiction have appeared in Slam Magazine, the Huffington Post, Springhouse Journal, and other publications. He was awarded the 2016 Deborah Schlossberg Memorial Award for Fiction. He received his MFA in fiction from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and he grew up in South Shore, Chicago, and now lives in Buffalo, New York. And if you all could just give a beautiful round of applause for Gabrielle Bump.
there's a little monitor here, I can see myself. Well, thanks, Tyrese Ferry and Dr. Bowder, and everybody for coming out and having me down. I'm glad I could make it. So my plan for the next 30 minutes or so is I'm going to read a little bit from the book, talk about why I wrote this crazy book, read a little bit more, and then we'll have a nice conversation. So I'm looking forward to it. So I'll start off reading one of the early chapters in Everywhere You Don't Belong. And I like to read this chapter because it was the first thing I wrote for this book when I was 20, 21 years old, about in the same age as probably some of the people in the audience now. And I didn't know that I was writing a book then. I just knew I was writing a story about this character that I was really interested in. So we'll read this, Fog. Oh, sorry. Okay. Can y'all hear me now? Yeah. All right, okay. I mumble and these mics are adjusting, so like I know it's a war against my voice that Chris is fighting. So this is Fog. Dad's friends hung out in places I couldn't go. On the other side of the tracks, down Jeffrey Avenue, deeper into South Shore. That's where Dad grew up, near the train stop to Indiana, across from the strip mall. That's where Dad's friends lived, still, in apartments clustered near mass transportation, people always coming and going and waiting and never leaving. Mom was from the Highlands, a 3-block chunk of South Shore reserved for black doctors, black politicians, black bankers, and black lawyers. All the rich people too dark-skinned for the suburbs, too poor to live downtown. Dad's friends didn't come over often. In the 60s, when they were teenagers, Coach and Dad had tipped buckets. They snuck up and tipped buckets of fish in the harbor, hauling ass through the golf course before the guy in a Vienna Beef uniform could catch them. That was when South Shore was still Jewish and Irish, before expressways and white flight and manicured suburbs. When the guy in a Vienna Beef uniform caught Dad, he dangled Dad by his ankles over the harbor and promised to drown him. There was a moral to that story, but Dad was never sure what it was. Coach thought the moral was don't fuck with anybody in a Vienna Beef uniform. When they were growing up, Harold Washington was mayor. The Jews and Irish were almost gone. A few stubborn old men refused to leave, clung to their porches until death, didn't care about the neighborhood's changing color. Dad and Coach would recite poetry by the water. Dad, once, wanted to get a doctorate in high Renaissance art. Coach, once, wanted to play ball in northern Italy, make a modest living around high culture. When they were young, Dad and Coach rode their bikes through the Highlands. When Dad started taking me to see Coach, Mom thought Dad was toughening me up by letting me witness a broken man break further. There wasn't anything tough about Coach. His wife had left him with 2 babies and moved to Florida. Dad took me to see Coach because Dad thought Coach was capable of murder-suicide. The first time Dad took me to Coach's apartment, 5 of us sat in 3 plastic chairs on Coach's shag rug. Dad bounced the babies on his knees. The empty fireplace overflowed with dusty trophies. When Coach started crying, Dad made me go into the bedroom with the babies. One Thanksgiving, when I was 5, Dad invited Coach over. Paul sat in the living room, watched Detroit struggle against Green Bay, and grunted when Coach pushed the double-wide pink stroller through the door. "Paul," Coach said. Paul was Grandma's friend. Coach handed the babies off to Mom and sat next to Paul on the couch. The game was enough to get Coach and Paul drunk off excitement. Dad wanted to get drunk too. Mom and Grandma kept yelling from the kitchen. Dad gave me a beer at dinner, which turned into a fight. "What do you want my grandson to be?" Grandma said. "What do you want our son to be?" Mom said. "This is a party. I don't want him to feel left out," Dad said. "My grandson is not a follower," Grandma said. "He is his own man. My son will be a force in the world," Mom said. "A father can give his son a beer whenever he wants. I can give my son a beer whenever I want." Dad slammed the table. Nobody looked at me. While they argued, I chugged the beer as fast as possible. Grandma, Mom, and Dad looked at Coach, who was flinging mashed potatoes at a giggling Paul. He used his fork as a slingshot. Mom slammed the table. Paul wiped the potatoes from his face. Coach turned toward Mom, raised his weapon, and hit Mom on the neck so clumps fell down her blouse. Grandma gasped while laughing. Her bracelets jingled when she grabbed her chest. Dad went for another beer. Paul called Coach a bastard. I felt lightheaded and sick. The babies crying marked the end of Thanksgiving. Mom held open the front door, held back her own tears. Dad told me to get my coat. Jeffrey Avenue felt quiet. Cars dodged potholes with grace. Coach stood at the stoplight and didn't say a word. We all smiled, waited for the light to change, looked at a bus struggle to a stop, and nodded at the faces in the window. Outside Coach's building, I knelt in front of the babies. Dad grabbed Coach behind his neck. "Are you going to be okay?" Dad asked. "Can you come upstairs?" Coach asked. "Please." Dad carried the babies. I folded the stroller and lugged it up. Coach hummed like mad over his jangling keys. "Who said God hates me? Who opened the bottle? Who sat there drinking all night and paced around the room with arms raised towards the ceiling and asked for forgiveness? Who forgot I was standing there? Who didn't hear the babies crying?" Dad woke up the next day with a hangover. Coach disappeared around Christmas. The babies ended up in Kentucky or Pennsylvania. And my life went on like that. People coming and going. Valuable things left in a hurry. So that's Fog. That's the start of the book. And like I said, that was the first chapter I wrote for this book. It was actually part of my undergraduate thesis at the Art Institute of Chicago that I transferred into from the University of Missouri after 2 swashbuckling years spent in Missouri. I decided to come back home. I decided I wanted to be a writer. What I also like about that chapter is that it's almost exactly the way that I wrote it when I was 20. I didn't change much. So much of this book changed over the years. I started when I was young. I finished it still young, I guess, but I finished it about 8 years later. It came out in 2020. I changed a lot, but that chapter remained the same. And the importance is also in that it was the last thing I wrote when I lived in Chicago. Because after I graduated the School of the Art Institute, I went out to Massachusetts for a grad school in the middle of nowhere, essentially, for a city kid outside Amherst. And that's where this book really started happening. And it was because of that distance, I think, from my home, that I was able to see it clearer. Right? I was able to, well, one thing is if you write about Chicago, people from Chicago can be kind of mean about it. Right? So it felt like when I was away, like you have to get everything right. And so I felt like when I was away in Massachusetts, I didn't have the whole city looking over my shoulder when I was writing these characters. And that was the easy part, because I was in a workshop and I was just writing 10 pages a week. And the whole first part of this book, the first half that takes place in Chicago, was easy to write because I just had all this stuff in me that I had to get out. And then the hard part happened after I'd written these Chicago sections, after Claude becomes 18 years old and decides to go off to college. Like, those are just natural things that happen, right? You grow up, you turn 18. For most people of Claude's background too, you go off to college somewhere, like I did. And it just is, you're forced into it. You're forced to do it. And then the hard part of this book, writing it, came when Claude gets to college and he has to learn something. And that's always the hardest part for me as a writer. It's the hardest part of writing this book, the hardest part of writing other books that I've written, the hardest part of talking about literature in my classes with my students, is at some point you have to learn something on the journey. And it took me 5 years, at least, to figure out what this book was actually about, what it was doing. So what I'm going to read now, before I talk directly about how I answered this, is I'm going to read just a break in the book between parts 1 and 2, where Claude's driving down to Missouri on the megabus, leaving his home for the first time. And it's called Interlude. Outside Springfield, a giant neon horseshoe sparkled over us and the gas station. We had 20 minutes to do whatever we had to do. Eat, smoke, go to the bathroom, sit and watch the cars pass on that highway. Sit and look out into the flatness. I saw 2 bus stations that day, hundreds of miles apart, similar in almost every way, except in noise and bustle. Here, a short man cried atop a pile of luggage under a faded streetlight. All the streetlights were faded, illuminated soft scenes. I wanted to tell Janice about the boring things I saw. I want to hear about her new job. I could hear her voice clearly, swearing, sweet, echoing in my head. I tried to call. She didn't pick up. I didn't leave a message. I used the urinal between two wide men wearing Cardinals jerseys. They spat dip into the bowl. They gave me sideways glances. I couldn't go. Outside, I tried to call Janice again. The bus driver yelled and honked as I tried to leave a message. So this character, Janice, Claude meets her in the neighborhood, and they become close. After a riot consumes the neighborhood, Janice, his family leaves, and then Claude's grandmother brings in Janice, and they're essentially brother and sister, but it's complicated, right? It's weird. And in the first versions of this book, Claude goes to college, and he leaves Janice behind. He leaves his whole family behind. He steps out into the world. And for whatever reason, I think it was I was watching a lot of The Sopranos at the time, and The Wire. We're near Baltimore, so I was watching The Wire too. Like, I like watching TV as I'm writing stuff. And so it's kind of ridiculously now thinking how the book turned out. There was this huge crime conspiracy in Missouri that Claude got sucked into. There's this gang that was in Chicago that found its way into Missouri. And I was writing all these action sequences. I wanted this big action book. And now it just seems so ridiculous to think about it. But I would show these pages to my agent, my very sweet, kind agent, who has put up with a lot from me. And she said, no, this isn't right. This isn't the book. And I was like, well, it's a book, right? It's 300 pages, stuff happens, there's excitement, there's explosions. And she was just like, you have to try again. This isn't the book. And so that's what I mean, the hard part is figuring out what a book means, right? It's not just a sequence of events, right? And so the first part of the book was easy because one, the narrator is young, and he's just experiencing things. And so people are coming and going out of his life. He's gleaming some lessons from it, but he doesn't really need that epiphany, right? Because he's 18. We kind of allow 18-year-olds to not think deeply about themselves. Not that they can't, but we forgive them for not doing it. But that's not a book. And so when I was having these back and forth with my agent for months, going on a year, she said, all right, take a step back. Let's think about what happens in his childhood that we can bring back to Missouri as he's growing up, as he's setting off in the world. What's the kind of pieces there? So there's his grandmother who raises him. And I didn't want the grandmother to come back because I think it's important for young people to leave their parental figures and not have someone guiding them directly that's guided them their whole life. So I didn't want that to happen. And there was this character, Janice, that was essentially just his first love. And like most of our first loves, they mean a lot, and usually we just go on with our lives, think about them often. But with Janice and Claude, their relationship seemed more important. There was something there. And this light bulb switched on in my head. Or my agent forced the light bulb into my ears. The physics of it don't matter. But so I decided to bring Janice back to Missouri. And so what happens when these two people find each other again? How does the book change? How does the lesson change? Because even Everywhere You Don't Belong wasn't the original title of this book. It had a more action thrillery title that my agent didn't like. But Everywhere You Don't Belong, we settled on, because it ends up being a book about finding your place and about belonging. And Claude ends up finding that place, not necessarily in Chicago or Missouri. It's not a place that is. It's his connection with this person that he loves. So that's where, in the background, I was talking to Tyrese about this. Essentially, this book ended up being a love story. It went from being just a coming-of-age story to an action thriller to a love story. And that's why I think writing novels is so amazing, because you're going on this own personal discovery, right? Like we're finding out all this stuff about ourselves. So like Claude, I grew up in South Shore. I went to college in Missouri for 2 years. I came back, and then I left. And while it's not autobiographical, right, there are emotions that I could connect to, right? Like going away to college, being homesick, like that happens in the book, and I remember that. I remember feeling that distinctly, like I don't belong here. In South Shore, I remember feeling from a very young age that the city doesn't treat us the way that it should. Like, why are we relegated to the status that we are? And so, right when this book was about to be done, Janice came back. There's still some action that happens. I was able to keep some of it. But Janice comes back and they leave together. And so I was going off to the printers. As in, everything was done, copy edits were done. And the process, like some of you know, takes a long time from writing a book to publishing it. And my agent calls me, or my editor called me, and it was like this weird emergency. I don't know, it's like someone got the nuclear codes or something. She was like, Gabe, that's not right, the book's not right. Like, we have to change this thing. It's like, it doesn't end. Like, what's the ending? Like, it just kind of stops, they like head off into the world. And again, I was like, well, it has an ending, the page stops, right? There's a period on page 260. And she was like, no, Gabe, like it doesn't, like we need something to wrap it up. And I remember I was on vacation somewhere, like getting ready for pre-publication stuff, like calming myself down. And she said, just write something and send it to me. And so I wrote what ended up being the last page of this book, which is the last thing I wrote for this book, where I just had to sit down and say, what is this all about? What happens? So this is where we belong. Sometimes, when it's morning and we're both tired, I stare across the table and see Janice again in the back seat. I see her hair rattling in the wind. I feel my hand on her knee, held there for hours and miles. I see her on the beach, picking up empty shells. I hear her kicking sand. I smell salt on her shoulders. I turn to her whenever the future frightens me. The present frightens me. The past ambushes my peace and sleep doesn't come. When the sun rises and Janice looks right at me, I see them all in her eyes. Grandma and Paul, happy, laughing, waving, safe. Everyone in South Shore, safe and happy. They're okay without us. They forgive us for leaving. We're okay too. Yes, right where we belong. And that's the book. That's the book. Yeah, so I guess now we'll talk some more. Yeah, so anyway.
Thank you for that. That was amazing. I love hearing about your process. A lot of that I can definitely relate to,
Yeah.
and trying to figure out, okay, is this gonna is this the right direction? And then you end up writing like more words than ever end up in the final product. You have a whole book of things that you cut out. And I think what I love about the fact that you read the last page is that as I was reading this, especially towards the end, I was very scared for Claude and Janice. And I was very relieved as someone, as I mentioned earlier to you, as a romance reader, they all usually end with happy endings. And so I was very excited that this had a happy ending because it gave me, it gave me happiness and a sense of levity. And I found throughout reading the book that there was a lot of levity in between a lot of these serious themes and actions and things like that. And I don't know about anyone else in the audience, but I laughed a lot when I read this book. Did anyone else laugh like as you were reading it? I don't know. But I wanted to talk to you specifically about sort of how you were able to do that. And if you realized that it was as funny in some parts as it was, and if you did that, that sort of juxtaposition, especially through dialogue that I noticed, intentionally, or if it just kind of came out like organically somehow.
Well, yeah, I'm glad to hear it was funny.
Yeah.
Well, I guess like there's another part that I would like to answer, to speak to also, like the idea of this like happy ending. Is that there were several versions of this book that didn't have a happy ending. Like there was one version of this book where Claude doesn't make it to the end, right? And that was too sad. And it was, so I wasn't writing towards a happy ending, right? It was just what the book needed, right? It was what the book was calling for, right? Like, and which I think was interesting. Is the other thing is like discovery, right? Like each book kind of calls for something different at the end. And with the humor, yeah, when like it was coming out and all the reviews were coming in, I was really surprised that people were like saying this book was funny, right? Like because, which I guess is a good sign, because usually if you're telling jokes and you're making yourself laugh, then they're usually not that funny. Or something, I don't know. And a lot of the humor in the book comes from the characters. So you say like the dialogue, right? So there's just some really funny characters that when I was writing them, like they felt so close to me. Like I just loved them so much that they were just behaving the way that like I thought they would in the world. So there's like this one scene where Paul, Claude's kind of like adoptive father, so where Paul is playing with these like martial arts weapons, and like he can't use them really well. And it's like hurting himself and is kind of making a fool of himself. And I think that's like, now I think it's funny, but when I was writing the scene, it was just what he would do, right? It was just natural for the character. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that particular section because, I mean, that was probably one of the sections where I actually was literally laughing out loud. But then I kind of felt guilty for laughing at Paul because I could feel the sincerity in his actions and his wanting to like, redeem himself and not get played. Like he was like, I will not get played. And
he gets played.
And he gets played. But he tries, and I think that that's one of the lessons or the things that he exhibits for Claude that sort of teaches Claude some aspects of a certain type of manhood that I felt was really visible throughout the entire book in terms of like Claude's relationship with other men in his life. So you talked about Janice and the grandmother, but I really wanted to hear your thoughts on the relationship that Claude had with the other men in his life, especially Paul, but his cohorts too, like his friends who all seem to have a sincerity about them, even when they were doing things that weren't necessarily right. It still felt like they weren't doing it in malicious ways or things like that. Can you talk about sort of this like softness that you created with your male characters?
Yeah, like some of it is just like I'm kind of soft. Right? I think like there's some of my softness that comes out in those. But so with the male characters, with Claude's male role models, essentially, in the book. And I'm not totally sure that this is a distinctly like black male Southside Chicago like situation. I don't think that it is, right? But I feel like we're taught a certain type of masculinity, right? Like there's a certain way that you have to act in public and private, like a certain way you have to carry yourself. And Claude gets all these kind of different examples as like picking and choosing aspects of these people that they like. And a specific example would be like the football player, Chester Dexter, who's this guy who's kind of in like a relationship with Janice, like they're like going out together, and they go out one night, and one of the most like sensitive moments in the book, a scene that I really like, is where they're getting just late night food after going to a party, and Chester Dexter and Claude end up in this car by themselves, and Chester Dexter just confides that like he loves Janice and is sad that he doesn't like, and there's that vulnerability that I think in common. And honestly, I think that's like a true vulnerability in male relationships that maybe doesn't get the attention it does. But there's been, and I don't think this is just me, but like when it gets to be like 4 o'clock in the morning and you're waiting for the food to come, and you're just like thinking of stuff, I feel like men can be really vulnerable with each other. It's like, man, I really love her, and she doesn't like love me back. And so those were the moments I was really trying to find throughout the book. You know, and I think that particularly in the male interactions.
Yeah, it reminded me of Jamel Brickley, A Lucky Man, like a lot of that sort of the under the layers sort of feelings, especially for me because I haven't been in those circumstances, you know, to understand sort of like what that looks like in reality, or rather like how men relate to one another when it's just them. And I think Paul, I think I was very attracted to Paul as a character because he was so willing to show Claude that it was okay to cry too. And you don't read that very often.
And Claude cries a lot.
Yeah.
Claude's like always crying. Maybe like too much. I've actually had to think about that. Like, why is this boy always crying? But no, and I don't think that I'm actually like an especially sensitive person. I think like his writers maybe were like kind of like sensitive to certain things. No, but I think that Claude's like emotional intelligence, and we were talking about this like backstage a little bit. But like Claude like isn't an exceptional person, right? He's not exceptional in traditional ways. Like he's not athletic, he's not particularly smart, right? Like he's not charming, like he's funny, but not like in an intentional, like will hold people's attention with his jokes, like kind of way, right? And so I think that the way that he is an exceptional person is that like openness, right? It is like that. That vulnerability mixed with like bravery. Right? I think that he's like brave in that way and cares about being a good person, not just like a tough person.
Right. And I think, you know, that's consistent with like, you know, I felt like Claude kept asking why everyone wanted him to act, or why everyone wanted him to try, or why everyone kept urging him to do something or be something other than what he sort of felt like doing. And even as a reader, I wanted to tell him like, okay, come on, like do it. But he resisted me as well as he resisted the folks in the book, which is fine because in the end, I still felt like he won, you know, he won in the end. And so it reminded me sort of how, and I don't know if you felt this in your life, but how a lot of young Black people get the urge or the sort of push from others in our community to be exceptional, to try towards that exceptionalism, that Black exceptionalism, as if we aren't allowed to just kind of be happy in our mediocrity and still win in the end. And so, you know, was that a theme that you wanted to express through Claude, or was it just who Claude is as a character?
Well, and like aren't necessarily allowed to fail.
Right.
So like that's the other thing. And like, so I felt So I went to the University of Missouri to like, it has this famed journalism school, right? And I went there like on, was in the honors college, like was in a scholarship, and I failed. Like it wasn't right for me. Like I didn't do well. Like it, the ground kind of got swept out from under me, and like I had to go. Like I wanted to go back home. None of it was working. Like I also like had to go back home. I had to like reset, and I was 20 years old, and I felt like a total failure, right? And I feel like in my time, I used to write about high school basketball players a lot, and like college basketball players, and you would talk to some of these guys that, like I don't know, are high-ranked, like 18-year-olds. They're like the best 18-year-old like basketball players in the country. And most of them don't make it to the NBA, right? Like most of them go to a big college, like go to like Louisville. I'm thinking of a few players in particular, but go to like Louisville, Kansas and stuff, and it just doesn't click. And they essentially fail and have to like rewrite their lives, right? And so I think that maybe it's like pushing against exceptionalism in that way too, right? Like life is long, right? Like we like make mistakes, we can rebound, we can like be okay.
Right.
But then, you know, we can also just try and live your life however you want to.
Right. And then in the end, you find where you belong.
Yeah, exactly. Man, it's like I'm not a journalist, like I'm not writing for the New York Times, like doing anything, but I like my life.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's fun. I get to be here with y'all.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk to you.
So we're going to open the floor for some questions from the audience here in person, as well as online. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come to the two microphones down here. Or if you need assistance, feel free to raise your hand and we will have someone bring a mic to you. While we wait for the questions to come in or folks to come down, I wanted to talk to you about sort of the timeline of the release of your book and how it sort of was serendipitous that it sort of correlated with some of the action in the book. Because this came out in 2020 and the book has you know, a race-related riot between cops and citizens. Did that feel like surreal?
Yeah. But like, I get like all of it felt surreal.
Yeah.
Like just all of 2020 felt surreal. What was, well, I don't know, it's kind of just a sad state of affairs, right? So like there's a scene where the police kill a boy in the neighborhood and the neighborhood responds and like this community organization responds. And there's like a riot and a lot of horrible stuff happening. Like things get damaged and burned. And I wrote that scene in Massachusetts during the kind of initial Black Lives Matter movement, like in Ferguson and Baltimore, like the uprisings and direct actions surrounding those events. And when I was writing it, I was like, well, why hasn't this ever happened in Chicago? Like I remember like kids in our neighborhood were getting killed. Like it was just, you would hear about someone getting killed by police and like you would just kind of go on with your day, right? And like you wouldn't really ask any questions, but you kind of like something didn't seem right. Like why wasn't this happening in Chicago? And in 2020 it like happened. Like my dad would call me, because I was living in Buffalo at the time, which has its own, like obviously like it has its own issues, sadly, like this year. We discovered that. And like my dad would call me on the phone and said, like I'm driving home and this feels like a scene in your book, right? Like it feels like this kind of chaotic, surreal thing, and it's just sad. Like I don't like it's not like prescient or anything. It's just sad that I could write a scene like that 6 years in the past, like with direct influence from something, and it would just happen, right? Like it would just happen again, and like who knows when it will happen again.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it feels almost inevitable to keep repeating.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? Like, we can keep talking, but we want to hear from you.
Yeah, we can keep going.
I think. Oh.
Yeah, don't be shy. We're nice enough people.
Was there a character that you struggled to find the voice for when you were writing this book? And if so, like, how did you deal with that?
Claude, yeah, like I really struggled with that. Now, for some of the reasons, like I was talking about up here, but one is because like the book. Well, here's like a piece of advice for any like young writers out there. Like it's helpful to write a story with a young narrator because like they don't have to have interiority. Like I was saying, like they can just watch things happen. So like that scene in Fog, like he's just watching this dinner party coming out, not like analyzing, well, why is my grandmother behaving this way? Like just people are acting, right? And so when it got time, when like in every step of the way, like I had professors, people I was working with on the publishing side, we're just like, okay, well, what does Claude think? Like, what does this kid like think about anything? And I'm like, I don't, you know, stuff, I don't know. And so that was the hard part. It was like really sitting down and again, like reflecting on what he's learning, what he's thinking about this stuff. And the riot scene, I think is a good example of that. It's probably the clearest moment where we get Claude, like an uninterrupted monologue from Claude. And that section where he's like thinking about like which side to take, right? Like who's on the right, who's on the wrong, like where does he fit into all this? And it's like maybe a 2-page, 3-page like monologue. And that might be the closest thing to like autobiographical writing that this book has. Because I was just having that thought during, again, like watching this stuff on TV. Like feeling isolated in Massachusetts, like I can't do anything from here. Like all this stuff is happening far away, and so yeah, so Claude. Yeah. Everyone else was fun and great to hang out with. I like Claude. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks.
We do have a question online. This is about how you started your journey as an author, and is it hard to become a writer?
Yeah. No, thanks for the question. Is it hard to become a writer? Well, okay, I guess another, like, do you feel like a writer now?
Do I feel like a writer?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I do when I'm writing. But that is, you know, being a writer is like, I think doing writing and as a writer, that's one thing, and then being a writer feels very different as two different things. I don't know, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think it's like the becoming that I'm like holding onto, the like becoming a writer. Because I think like when I was like 15, just like writing poems in math class, like I think I was a writer.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Like I was a writer, and that was like easy and fun. But then like publishing a book, going out in the world with it, and then I think both of us were fortunate. Like our kind of first books like did get some good like traction. Like we still have to work.
Yeah,
Right? Like,
yeah.
it's not, like we're not John Grisham or anything like
Yeah.
that. But like you still have to write another book and do that. But knowing that you've done it the first time, it becomes easier writing the second. At least like you know that you've done it once, and like maybe you can do it again. Like I'm working on finishing up edits on my second book now, and I don't know if it can come out. It's supposed to come out next fall. It can come out and like nobody can read it, like it can kind of bomb. But I know like I did it like once, right? And I'll try and do it again, like because I'm like at this point I'm just addicted to it. Like and honestly I can't like go work for a hedge fund. I don't have like the skill set. You know, I can't do anything else. Like I can teach and I can write, and I really love doing those things. Like I don't want to do anything else.
Yeah, that's great. Is there another online?
We do have another one from the community who's watching online. This is, you mentioned the fate of some basketball players, Gabriel. Did you play basketball?
Yeah, poorly. Like I couldn't, and still like I can like pass, I can like dribble kind of well. I just have no shot. Like I can't shoot. Never have. No, but I used to like scout basketball, and this was during like this golden age of high school basketball in Chicago. With like, I don't know, Jabari Parker and like Anthony Davis. Derrick Rose was kind of the first one to like bring it. It was just like it was just so exciting to go to like high school basketball games. Now it's like PG County and like Baltimore, maybe LA or like the news centers. But for a while, Chicago was like where young basketball players were coming of age. So I wasn't good enough to like be part of that group, but I learned a lot from seeing 18-year-olds that are so like hyper specialized at this thing. And like what struck me and still strikes me now, and maybe basketball players are different now because they're like more online and more like visible, but when I would hang out with like these 16 and 17-year-old kids that were like, had as good of a shot as anybody to like go play professional basketball and make millions of dollars, like anybody in the world, they had as good a shot as anybody in the world, and they were just like so boring. It isn't like not in like a bad way, but like they were like you talk to them about like, so what do you like doing outside of playing basketball? It's like, well, I like to play basketball, video games, I like playing out with my little brother, and they're just like normal, right? And they, maybe they're hiding that pressure really well, but yeah, there's something interesting that I haven't totally explored. I think I want to do in fiction, write like a basketball book, but yeah.
I wonder if we want to end with this question, if there's no more in-person questions. I'm so glad someone asked this. Can you talk about the decision to name your character after poet Claude McKay? Were there specific pieces of his that inspired the choice?
I was hoping this question would come.
Yeah, and so yeah, it was intentional. Like I said, my mom's side of the family's from Harlem. My grandmother, who this book is dedicated for, and who passed like when I was first like writing it, and I still have family in Harlem. So I grew up like really fascinated with the Harlem Renaissance, like as a movement, and I really love Claude McKay's work. And maybe it's particularly If We Must Die, the sonnet, that seemed to really connect to this book I was trying to write. And others, like his other, like Banana Bottom, Home to Harlem, like all of his work was kind of in there. But I was a big Harlem Renaissance fanboy. It was kind of in my blood in some way.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks,
This was fabulous. I wish you all success, especially as you work on your next book.
Yeah.
And thank you to the audience here and online.
And thank you both.
All right, thanks,